So we're going to back up a little bit just to provide context for what comes next. To Winthrop's point, it does appear that boundaries and rules can, in some instances, provide for more freedom. For example, at a playground near a very busy road. Think the interstate, cars constantly zipping by, no breaks in traffic. In such a case, children will tend to stay close to the equipment, even if there are a few acres surrounding the playground. However, put up a fence and the children appear to have more freedom. They will play all the way up to the fence, even if it is only a few yards from the busy street. I just want to actually make commentary here, because if they didn't have the fence and they wanted complete freedom, these children might actually run into the road, get hit by cars, get killed, right? So even if there are people who are not afraid to go near the interstate, there will probably end in destruction, and then there will be fear for the rest of the children on the playground, and they'll stay close to the equipment. The fence gives them the freedom to use the extra acres around the playground. They may add games like kickball or tag to the playground romps. Not only does the fence embolden the children on the playground to make use of more of the surrounding space, but it eliminates or at least reduces the temptation to run into traffic for those not afraid of the busy street. In addition, if the fence is high enough, it can prevent balls from being lost to that traffic, or from rolling too far for the children to go fetch without losing too much time, or spending too much energy, or getting lost looking for the balls in the tall grass or the woods or whatever borders the other sides of this hypothetical playground. The fence, the boundary, provides more freedom and more opportunities to enjoy all the potential fun the field has to offer. Without the defined boundaries, the children do not take advantage of all the freedom available to them. Give them a boundary and they open their lives up to several more opportunities. Rousseau's argument is again the opposite. It is the boundaries that cause the evil and restrict freedom. For example, there would be no trespassing or looting or destruction if no one owned property. Or at a more global level, there would be no competition between nations or societies, no wars if there was no civilized society. If the boundary did not exist, one could never cross the boundary, and thus there would be more freedom. Therefore, Rousseau argues, mankind would be better off if we had never been civilized. But Rousseau has a problem. We have been civilized. Rousseau identifies the problem, we have been civilized, and then offers a solution, the general will. According to Rousseau, the father of modern democracy, it is through the social contract with the general will that the goodness of man can be recaptured within the evil of society itself. And this is democracy. It is through democracy, the social contract with the general will, that we solve the problem of being civilized. Quote, find a form of association which defends and protects with all common forces the person and the goods of each associate, and by means of which each one, while uniting with all, nevertheless obeys himself only and remains as free as before. Another quote. Each of us places his person and all his power in common under the supreme direction of the general will. And as one, we receive each member as an indivisible part of the whole, end quote. So what is going on here is, and I come back to this in a little bit, is that you are no longer an individual. You are a single member of an entire group. And once you place yourself in that group, you are under the complete subjugation of that group. You are under the authority of the general will of the common good. All right, another quote. At once, in place of the individual person of each contracting party, this act of association produces a moral and collective body composed of as many members as there are voices in the assembly, which receives from this act its unity, its common self, its life, and its will. So individuals are also placing themselves under the authority of the assembly. So when you think about a republic, it's just a representative democracy. That's exactly true. It's though you are so individuals are giving up their individual rights and subjecting themselves to the common will of the assembly, the representatives of the democracy. Quote, again, at once, in place of the individual person of each contracting party, this act of association produces a moral and collective body composed of as many members as there are voices in the assembly, which receives from this same act its unity, its common self, its life, and its will, end quote. In Rousseau's general will, there are no more individuals, just a collective body. And every member of the collective body has the same will. And that is okay. No one needs to worry, says Rousseau, quote, since the sovereign is formed entirely from the private individuals who make it up, it neither has nor could have an interest contrary to theirs. Hence, the sovereign power has no need to offer guarantee to its subjects, since it is impossible for a body to want to harm all of its members. Thus, it cannot harm any one of them in particular, end quote. And here is the problem with democracy, right? This is my commentary again. This is the problem with democracy. The sovereign, in Rousseau's argument, is that it can never actually hurt itself. It has no desire to hurt itself. Therefore, it's not going to hurt any one particular member individually. And this is because once you become a part, and we'll see how this works in a minute, once you become a part of the general will, the majority gets to decide what is right and good. The majority gets to decide what your happiness is. The majority gets to decide what your values are. You no longer are subject to your own will and your own responsibility, your own value systems. Instead, you're subjected to the common good, what's decided by democracy through a majority vote, what is good and right, and what your will is. You have no more private will. All right. So going back to the book, the sovereign government, in other words, does not need to guarantee any rights to the members because, Rousseau argues, that sovereign government cannot have interests contrary to the interests of the individual members. Thus, only the general will matters. The sovereign's will, the government's will, dictates what society wants and needs. But more than that, Rousseau argues, it is the only true will of the people. Quote, the sovereign, by the mere fact that it exists, is always all that it should be, end quote. And here is the rub I have with democracy. In democracy, there is no individual will. The will of everyone in the society is the same. Even though an individual might have a private will that is contrary to or different from the general will, he has no right to that private will. In Rousseau's democracy, individuals also have no rights and no freedom to be different. And this is commentary again. And this is why it's so important, and I will definitely come back to this later, I'm sure, but this idea of private property, like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness it was plagiarized from John Locke's Life, Liberty, and Property. And Madison's essay on property discusses the most fundamental property is that of one's own conscience, one's own thoughts, one's own opinions, and thus the freedom of speech, the freedom of property is actually the freedom of thought and the right to have your own private opinion, which goes completely against what Rousseau is describing here. Quote, thus, in order for the social compact to avoid being an empty formula, it tacitly entails the commitment, which alone can give force to the others, that whoever refuses to obey the general will be forced to do so by the entire body. End quote. In other words, if someone disagrees with the sovereign, the government, if someone disagrees with the sovereign, if someone disagrees with the government, he will be forced to be free. What? Wait. I thought freedom was the absence of or the lack of coercion, force. Not in a democracy. According to Rousseau, if someone disagrees with the general will, that person did not really know what he, she, or they wanted. So everyone else is looking out for you and forcing you to be free, forcing you to agree with the general will. And this is the first place the cognitive dissonance necessary to live in a democracy is revealed. Because freedom is lack of coercion, but according to Rousseau, according to democracy, one can be forced to be free. In a democracy, to be free, one needs to follow the majority because the majority knows better than the individual how to make the individual happy. Okay, so I'm going to end with some commentary here. Hopefully now you see the problem with equating our constitutional federal republic with democracy. And hopefully you can also see the problem with using the word democracy in instances where you want to identify threats to freedom. Freedom and democracy are not the same thing. In fact, they are the very opposite. It is impossible to have democracy and individual liberties. It is impossible to have democracy and individual rights. These ideas are antithetical to one another. We need to stop framing our way of life in terms of democracy.